we start the beginning of today's call. Again, the Bigler Bomb, the ultimate sneaky sneak. So two quick kind of background slides. The first one is I asked you guys to study something called BDT earlier, and I defined it in two different ways. The first way I defined it was the bulk data transfer. And then I also said it could be perceived as the blockchain document transfer. So why was this really important? Well, for those who do study the Q drops, they will have noticed that BDT is referenced many, many times. And so I kind of summarized my initial thought and I said, how do you deliver something that's both bluntly and directly, that's also related to currency and thwarting something and delivering messages while also playing a chess game, giving commands, which could also mean command prompts like in programming, and you're talking to the Q team. The only way you can accomplish all of those different things and hit every single keyword in those drops is through BDT. And so I thought it kind of funny because when you're really on to something, you know you're on. And I sent this message to Ben, I think it was within a couple hours of me starting to look into BDT. So I hadn't even finished my research. And I said, you know, Ben, I'm going to tie IBM ZOS when I finish reading it into BDT. And he starts laughing because he already knows where this is going. So IBM, this Z generation of their operating system, which is what the OS stands for, really kind of was frameworked around 2017, but it's actually been in existence since the 1960s. So the Z came in where they were trying to give it some kind of nickname and they called it zero downtime. But us being, part of military intelligence and reading into things, Z for me also means the end, right? It's the ending of the alphabet. It's the end game. So when you look at some of the big pieces that we will get into in a second, this ZOS is all about full backward compatibility. And because I didn't know what that term meant, I had to look it up and I found out that backward compatibility in terms of technology literally means interoperability. And that's what we've been learning about, again, guys, for the last 2 years in Stellar. So virtualization is also a massive component that's actually required. And not only is it required, it becomes a default on the IBM Z systems. Now, there's a portion of it, which I'll come back to later on the call as well, but it's opsin. Opsin ties directly to this operating system. So what exactly does it mean in a short summary? Opsin is instruction, and this instruction can define or redefine and or delete the existing operational codes, right? So now we're kind of like, doesn't that sound just like prettier.js, but potentially on a bigger scale? So now let's move into the first actual section of this. We're going to talk about enhancements followed by security, and then of course, our sneaky sneak ninjas. Enhancements. So the first thing I want you guys to know is as we go through the slides, I'm not going to read everything. Obviously, there's a lot of information. I will be posting the slides afterwards so you guys can read the slides on your own time and then follow up with additional research as needed. But one thing that I found very interesting about this is ZOS is what IBM defines as their premier operating system. They call it unmatched in the industry. And the purpose of it is to design applications for quantum algorithms. So this black picture that you see here really talks more about the opsin, but these white pictures you see here, followed by the next slide, all these pictures that you see here are all the recent changes to the ZOS update. And this update, I believe, if I remember correctly, was in September of last year. Now, one thing about me is, again, guys, I don't have this technology background. So I had to come at this from a totally clean slate, right? The carte blanche I mentioned earlier. And one of the big reasons why I was able to find the information that I could find is because since I don't have industry knowledge on this, I researched every single keyword. It led me down about 50 different rabbit holes, which then led me to another 100 rabbit holes. And that's why this research took me 2 weeks to finish. Whereas if somebody's coming from the IT industry, they might look at a keyword and say, oh, I know what that means. We don't need to read what the updates are. And I think that could be one of the big differences between why I was able to find some of these hidden Easter eggs versus why other people who might be in the industry might have overlooked this update thinking it's just another standard update. So a couple quick thoughts. This version 3.1 upgrade to me was all about hiding Trojan horses amongst the upgrade. And what they did is, as you can see on the slide, there are so many bullet points of data, right? And within that, it wasn't that every single bullet point was massive. They all had some good, interesting information, but it was maybe 50%, 60% of very interesting, sneaky, hidden ninja, which means 40 to 50% of the data, if you looked at it, you would have thought, okay, maybe not so interesting, so I don't want to read the rest of it. And that's where people go wrong, is because they don't read every piece of information to really find out what's truly being said behind the scenes. And the last thing I want to point out before we go to the next slide is this last point here. So when you look at the upgrades, it talks about what they've done to upgrade, and then it ends up with what's been deleted from the last version of it. And so I pulled it over here. It says they deprecated the term bulk data transfer for this new upgrade. So for me, I'm interpreting it as it became what's known as the blockchain document transfer. But guys, we're talking about the quantum version, not the normal other blockchain document transfer. So a second ago, Hawkeyes was talking about interoperability, and I'm going to prove to you that this is mass interoperability that I've never seen before. We kind of had a brief snippet of it talking about IBM Hyperledger. We kind of had a brief snippet of it talking about Red Hat, and we kind of talked about it with a brief snippet when we did the Linux Foundation ICO a couple months ago. Well, this now combines everything together and adds more things on top. And so we're truly looking at deploying ZOS on all global corporate hardware and software, right? Because a lot of IBM is more hardware type things, but because of the Red Hat integration, that now ties into the software and the programming side of things as well. And so one thing about this IBM massive interoperability is it connects to every single type of device, every single type of operating system. It doesn't matter if you're a PC or a Mac or Linux, whatever, it goes everywhere and there's no exception to the rule. And on top of that, not only are you connecting to it, but more importantly, you can transfer every file and every code and interoperate again between all of the different systems. And that's why it is so massive. Now, really briefly, I want to talk about TLS. TLS stands for Transport Layer Security. It was the version that took over the secure sockets layer. And these are used for encrypting apps and encrypting browsers. And so one interesting fact that I found when I was doing my research into this is between the combination of SSL and TLS, they are actually used by 99.9% of all websites in the entire world. And more importantly, they're interoperable with caching on IPFS. Now, IPFS, you guys might remember from our SEPS review call with Sinjin last year in July. And if you don't remember, no big deal. We'll come back to IPFS in a couple of slides from now as well. So web authentication. The reason why I want to highlight this is because it also ties into another Stellar SEP. This is SEP number 10, literally named Stellar Web Authentication. And so this is what you guys will need, or not us, but the programs will need to be able to interface with metrics, reports. That's how they'll also be able to connect into Stellar or future DApps, which stands for decentralized apps. So all of these things that are being built in the background, as they start to interoperate with Stellar, the vast majority, if not all of them, will be built on some kind of web interface. And that's the reason why you have to have web authentication, so you can link everything together. All right, so let's talk about IPFS for a quick second. In the IBM version of it, they call it Real Storage Manager, but on the normal IT world and also the stellar world, it's called IPFS. And what does IPFS actually stand for? It's Interplanetary File System. So just think about the name behind that, and I think that kind of explains exactly what it is. But again, guys, we want to bring proofs that this connects into stellar. So if you look at it, you've got SEP 15 here, which is, they're both in draft mode, but 15 is the attachment convention, and that means they want to be able to attach information that's way bigger than you can currently hold on the blockchain. So you have to have an attachment come in, kind of like an attachment on your email. That's what allows you to write or compress more information, even though you're only sending one email. And then over here, SEP 22, it's literally called the IPFS support proposal. And so it tells you right then and there, they're looking for IPFS. So one really cool thing about this is the reason why Real Storage Manager, aka IPFS, is so powerful is because when they're looking at real storage, it's not just the physical storage on your own personal computer or even the physical storage on, let's say, the server of one company. What they're doing is they're tying it into a cloud version. So now you're looking at the backing of a virtual storage and they're connecting it to a pool of online storages. And so the more members that join the IPFS, the bigger the storage gets. So why is that so powerful? Because IPFS, it means you're going to have open source, decentralized, peer-to-peer data management system. There's nothing central about it. Everything literally runs on nodes, just like Stellar Consensus also runs on nodes. So what kind of information can be shared back and forth? Well, they talk about files and digital data, applications, websites. They talk about NFTs as well, so you know they're connected to crypto. But so now we're talking about having a decentralized server specifically for large scale data storage. And they're also looking for large scale computing because they're wanting, the big goal for IPFS is to build the decentralized web of the future. So just a quick note on 64-bit Java. Maybe Hawkeyes and Sinjin can touch on this later if they want to. But the reason why this was interesting for me is because a lot of servers and systems right now, or applications rather, they run on 32-bit. So by doubling it, it makes it faster. So you have enhanced memory, you have enhanced performance. But one of the drawbacks that they currently talk about in the news is that 32 and 64 doesn't really have a massive difference because the servers can't really accommodate this big upgrade. Well, guys, that's why everything's being upgraded, because that way when you go to 64, you can actually fully utilize and optimize 64 as opposed to in name only, but it's really still running on 32-bit. So they're literally telling you they're getting ready to upgrade the entire world into quantum computer so you can have quantum compliance. Now, one other thing that I really have to credit, there's a lady in QSI whose name is Mika. She really helped me to understand the significance of this other upgrade for the ZOS, because they talked about the ISO 2022, which is not the same as ISO 20022, right? One is more about the crypto. This one is about Unicode standards. And when you looked it up, it really signifies the interoperability, not just with different characters, meaning different languages, but they kept focusing over and over again on the importance of incorporating Japanese language into IBM. So here I am sitting here thinking, what is the uniqueness or the importance of emphasizing Japanese language? So this message that Mika sent in our QSI chat is really what nailed it for me. She talked about how in Japanese news, they're starting to use more and more language modules, right? LLM. And what they're getting ready to do is to have mass adoption. So when I started doing more research into it, that made so much sense to me, because I think everybody in the world knows that Japan is really the forefront in AI automation robotics. But in the last couple of years, they've been quote unquote lagging behind, not because of they're, wanting to lag behind. It's really because they've been the ninja behind the scenes. Again, they're letting other countries come to the forefront. And then when Japan comes in, it's like, all right, now it's game on. So a couple things that I picked up doing extra research on this. So the Japanese LLM represents the most amount of cultural and linguistic differences. And so the Japanese LLM is actually significantly stronger than ChatGPT. And that's the reason why a lot of this generative AI ML is almost like, not that it's limited by ChatGPT, but you're not seeing exponential growth in it. But when you add Japanese LLM, we're going to see it skyrocket in the next year or two. So NTT Labs, it says it's the leading NLP, neuro-linguistic programming of Japan. They've been building LLMs for predominantly the medical and the customer service industry. But now they're starting to do, as of this month, they're starting to do operational efficiency and data transfer, right? Data transfer, blockchain data transfer. And NEC, which is a massive company in Japan, they're working on something called a lightweight LLM. And the whole purpose of that is to downsize the high performance into a single GPU. Again, guys, I will ask Hawkeyes and Sinjin to elaborate on this a little bit more at the end of this particular section. But the way that I'm interpreting this is typically when you're looking at large quantum LLM, you need massive amounts of computing power. So that could potentially mean lots of computers, lots of servers, maybe quantum servers. And so just the footprint of what you need is extraordinary. And what they're doing is they're making it so a single GPU, which is significantly smaller in footprint, can become a quantum computer on its own. And the last thing I'll mention is Japan's Ministry of Education, Culture, Sport, Science, and Technology are creating their own model. And this model is absolutely insane. When I was doing research into this, most of the LLMs currently are about 1 billion to, on a high level, 20 to 30 billion. But the ministry that's doing this model publicly stated they're looking at over 100 billion parameters, right? So this is already 3 times larger than the most common, not the most common, the most well-known of the big ones, right? The 20 to 30 one. Now it's going to jump light years to 100 billion parameters. But as I was reading into this article here that I found on LinkedIn, it actually says, no, guys, it's probably not even billions. It's possibly trillions of parameters. And that's really going to accelerate the research in the programming behind quantum algorithms. And they expect this to be available in 2031. So now let's shift gears over a little bit and talk about AI. So within, again, the updates, there's something called JES, and JES stands for Job Entry Subsystem. So what does it mean? It means as all these jobs are coming, like the workload is coming into the system, they have to start prioritizing things. And when they prioritize it, this script, this module is going to say, what is important to do? What is not important to do? What should we do? What should we not do? Do we need to hold something or cancel a job altogether? But when you looked at what JES2 meant, 2 represents the upgrade that literally says we're going to support infusing AI into our operating system. So the version 3.1 update is they're adding this SAF resource, which will control/restrict who can access FTP, which is the file transfer protocol within the JES mode. So literally, they're building into the system who has the authorization to change, modify, or create the job flow that connects AI into all of the clients that are using this ZOS system. And finally, it also mentions that they're literally auto-connecting and auto-upgrading all the older versions, right, for interoperability. And they're going to deploy intuitive generative AI/ML for companies. So in the past, we talked about AI/ML. Then when we did our Red Hat and our SEPs call, we highlighted the emphasis of generative AI/ML and how that really transcends the learning curve and compresses it quantumly. But now we're introducing another new word, intuitive generative AI/ML. And this is really what we've been talking about for a while, just without proof. And now we have the proof that they're connecting your intuition with the quantum algorithms. So if we talk about AI in terms of the workload manager for a quick second, I want to re-highlight the fact that IBM, which has bought over Red Hat, they're doing this because they're designing these algorithms to literally eliminate overhead. And they wrote those words into those upgrades. And they, more interestingly, they've created this workload manager as a free program for all clients, which means every company who has purchased this, the IBM software systems, they're getting this workload manager automatically installed for free. It's literally what they call an entitlement program. And this program is going to teach those companies how to lay off their own people because they're going to become so automated with, through the intuitive generative AI/ML. And so again, guys, that's the reason why Matt Hicks from Red Hat said that layoffs are a healthy thing. And if you do it the right way, it's actually going to become very successful for your company. So this is, again, guys, the reason why all over the world, doesn't matter what country or what industry or what company, we've been seeing news for years now that this company is downsizing this department, or they're laying off, they're closing down these branches. It's because of this automation, right? We've been proving this over and over again with all of our different articles. Now let's talk about offline transactions. Why is this so important? Again, guys, because it ties to Stellar. We know Stellar must have the ability for offline transactions, and we know it's already true. They've been telling us for years, but here's actually where Stellar themselves say. Over here, if you go to the Stellar website directly, they talk about anchors as the example and how you will need to run an anchor when it's offline, because an offline anchor will help to safeguard the security of the anchor. And then down here, they talk about how SEPs will need to be created so that you can have offline QR code payments, offline POS transactions, offline peer-to-peer payments, right? So again, guys, this is all the public proofs that IBM Stellar is all interoperable and how payment is a massive proponent of it. Now, a couple other things to note is sometimes a server might go down, right? Like an outage of sorts. Sometimes you're going to see server failures, but regardless of the failure or the outage, these transactions are still going through, and that's the reason why you have to have these quantum systems in play, because only the quantum systems will be able to touch into the quantum blockchain. So a couple more examples. Recently, we posted some articles on QSI that talked about Velo Orbit, right? We all know about Velo, the company, and how they're tied to Jed McCaleb. He's on the board of directors, but they recently launched a new program called Orbit, and that's where your API can connect online and offline to merchants specifically so they can use QR codes. And they expect that to become the new standard of payments. Well, what did I just read a second ago? Online and offline QR code is part of the SEPs that the SDF has been talking about, right? And then also recently, the Brazilian digital real, they have been working on a pilot for offline anchors. Again, guys, that's what Stellar was talking about right here in their offline anchor program. And so this is why it's really important to understand how the technology works in the back end. So one other little thing, which we'll come back to later as well, is the understanding that when you can stop and halt or blacklist transactions, this also shows you the beginning of the technology on how you blacklist wallets or thwart certain transactions, because those will be baked into the future security that will be written into legislation coming down the pipeline. So Now, if we talk about DFSMS TVS, big mouthful, this is actually what SpeedX is, right? So if you've been in Stellar for a long time, I wrote about this back in November of 2021. When Stellar was upgrading their speed, they referred to something called SpeedX. And what they talked about was having parallel trains of these quantum servers. That way you don't overload one server. You can have, let's say, 2 or 100 or 1,000,000 quantum servers running in parallel, so you never overload one, and therefore you can handle massive amounts of transactions without the delays. And that's what they're building towards. And so I pulled this excerpt over here. This was written by, Jed McCaleb and David Maziers and a whole bunch of other people, but I highlight those two names because they are the two of the three co-founders of Stellar. And so here again, they're talking about, you can have massive amounts of data and transactions. They can be processed in literally seconds on a single CPU. But if the need arises where they need to enhance performance, we can parallelize the search. And that parallelization is the SpeedX. And if we talk about here, they are also talking about having concurrent, which means parallel, batch systems in order to process their data. And I threw out some conjecture out there as well that this could possibly be how they're going to be used for clawbacks, because they mention the fact that through this parallelized system, they can enact something called the undo function. So, okay, before we go on to the next section, again, we're going to take a quick break and see if anybody on the panel has anything they want to add.
With what you just said, that DFSMS TVS, it's like parallel computing. And if you tie that into the Java 64, which the whole thing about 32-bit and 64-bit is the purpose is to do like parallel computing and give you more bandwidth on the CPU and memory and everything else, so that you can run concurrent tasks or instructions for the application. So that kind of that DFSMS TVS sounds like is tying into that Java 64. I am surprised that Java is. I didn't know that they weren't 64-bit at this point, because 64-bit's been around for a long time.
Yeah, and one of the things I also noticed, I don't remember the exact date, maybe I put on the slide, but they were doing the big Java release was only in January of this year. I think it was like January 24th or something like that. I'd have to go look. But I just found that really interesting because, like you said, it's been around for a while, but they haven't truly deployed it just yet.
Emily, did they discuss the offline mechanism on how they're able to do that without having connectivity? What's the means? Have they said that yet? What the means are in order to be able to do this?
I haven't come across that in my research yet. I just know it's possible because we have too much confirmation. But how the actual technology works, then maybe that'll be another dive for the future. Or maybe somebody else who's listening on the call can go, somebody who's more techie than me can go and find that information and share that with the rest of us. Go ahead, Hawkeyes.
Okay, that was a lot of mouthful, and I'm afraid you may lose some people. So I'm just gonna go back and try to give some visualization. So just think about having 100 people to do the same task. And what we're trying to do right now to make more content is to reduce the amount of quote unquote people, right? Let's go by 10%. So instead of requiring about 100, I'm saying people, but I'm talking about just visually to say people, but really I'm talking about the processing, the computer, and all the resources. If we can reduce it by 10%, meaning instead of 100, we need 90, that's a lot of savings, money-wise, people, time, everything. But what they're doing right now is they're not stopping at 10%. They're going to continue to optimize more. So you go from 100 maybe to 90, maybe go down to 90, 85, progressively get less and less people, meaning that more layoff, meaning more people free time, so that are more Chisara. The other thing is, in terms of when you went over just 2, in the mainframe world, which is right now, like Christopher David, he would understand, and even I think Darren Brown, or even Sinjin, when you guys are doing your programming, you do have scripts that you have to write, which is another language to the computer to tell it how to run the job, when to run the job, and all that scheduling. But it's all languages. But with the mainframe, it has its counterpart, which is Jest, but now it's Jest 2, and it ties in the AI, which again is reducing the amount of people to manage and to operate. So you have more people free time. And then in terms of speed X, you and I may understand what parallelism and concurrency mean, but to the normal people, they won't understand it. So just think when you're at a racetrack, let's say either the horses or even people at the track field. Let's say you have about 10, 20 people all starting at the start line. And when you say go, all 10 of them go. And that's what we're talking about, parallelism and concurrency. So divvy up instead of doing it the waterfall where you only have one person do 10 things. If you have 10 people do different things, you maximize your time. So that's where Speed X comes in because it makes the processing more efficient, and you can divvy up the work so you have less, what you call it, I wouldn't call it balancing, but overall it's more efficient, it's more time, more again the word efficient, but it's more faster, it's faster. Everything you want is faster stuff. That's where you have quantum. I hope that helps everyone. Thanks, Emily.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. And again, guys, because I know her microphone kind of cuts out a little bit. So I wanted to make sure that people understand that because that's so important to understand. This notion of parallelism, again, think about the word parallel. You're just in parallel, right? You're running on the same path or track, like how Hawkeye's mentioned. So if I reiterate what she said a second ago, think about if you have a job with 100 tasks. If one person does 100 tasks, that could take months, it could take years. But if you say 100 people only do one task each, maybe it takes one day to finish. That's the kind of stuff that we're talking about. But instead of people, we're talking about computers or servers at this moment.
Yeah, I can throw in an analogy also. Say you have 10,000 bricks, and there's 10 of us there to move these 10,000 bricks, move it over from the driveway to the backyard. And if you think about computers today, when you buy a computer, a lot of times they talk about how many cores does it have. You know, a computer, a CPU may have 8 cores, 10 cores, 100, 24 cores, or whatever. So we're all standing there at the bricks, and this ties back into the Java 64 and the 64-bit and everything. If I'm the leader and I say, Emily, go move those 10,000 bricks to the backyard. I'm running on her 32-bit, and then I say, Nick, go help Emily. Well, you guys are just doing it one thread at a time, one core at a time. But if I say I'm 64-bit, I say everybody at the same time, let's start taking these 10,000 bricks and moving them all at once together. That's kind of how you can picture, like what she said with the horse racing. Everybody takes off at once, so everybody's running at the same time. And that's how you move those bricks much more efficiently, because I've done this. My wife and I have done this about 10 times in the last year. It's much more efficient to do it everybody moving at the same time rather than one instruction at one instruction at a time. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I was going to say also, in addition to division of the jobs itself, where some of each line is parallel and doing part of the work. Also, you can set it up in specialization where one particular unit does only one thing, and by doing that, instead of it doing multiple tasks, it's probably much faster and much more efficient that each section will be doing a particular task and nothing else. So you got several ways of dividing up the workload that can make it much more efficient.
And one other thing, can I ask either St. John or Hawkeyes to explain the notion of lightweight LLM being able to be computed on one GPU? What is the significance of that? And kind of give us and maybe an image of what that looks like. Like, what is the significance of why that downsizing is so impactful?
I think it almost sounds like it's going to be, because I haven't read about it, but to me, from what you were saying, it sounds like it's a kind of like a front end to a cloud back end, so that it can be on any device and only have to use one GPU. Now, it probably has some basic data and that it can access to do what it needs to do, but it does sound like to me that it's more of like a front end. I don't know if you guys have ever downloaded a piece of software and it says, do you want to download the small version, which would then download a little installer and then goes out to the cloud and downloads the bulk of the files? Or do you want to download the heavy version, or the big version, which is the whole thing encompassed into itself, so that everything is, when you download the big one, it's all on your PC, and you don't have to touch the internet or touch the cloud to get it. That's kind of what it sounded like to me, but I would have to read more about it.
For me, I have to look it up, but just from hearing what you said, Emily, intuitively, I understand it with that scenario where you have 100 people doing the task. If you can reduce it, let's say to by, eliminating 10, to go from 100 down to 90, or eventually down to one. So just imagine the cost saving. Instead of spending $1 billion to process some however many records, and all you have to do is spend maybe a couple hundred millions. You see the savings and how efficient that is, because you eliminated all the unnecessary stuff. And also you maximize your resources. So you don't have, let's say, 10 machines, you only need one. So every time when you hear about quantum, is everything compressed. Instead of having multiples, you may need one, two, or three. So it's all about maximizing the efficiency. It's all about cost saving, speed, and performance and volume.
Yeah, and it sounds like usability too. It sounds like like Sinjin said, it's like a front end thing where you might need something like along the lines of several computers to run the model. It seems like they're bringing it down to a level where it can be used by one CPU or GPU. That makes it much more usability wise, makes a lot more people be able to use it, rather than if you need some kind of technical hardware that most people don't have.
Yeah, that's how I was kind of interpreting it too. So good. Glad we all have consensus here. Jason, Mimsy, ask if y'all want to add anything before we go to the next section? No? Okay. So let's move on to quantum security. All right. So one thing that I was doing my research into, which may seem obvious, but of course, having more confirmation, more proofs is always a better thing. IBM is really the leader in asset management and monitoring, because they have all these different softwares. And one thing that I found that is not unique to IBM, I mean, every company does it, they're just the best at it, is whenever they find another company or another program that does something better than them, they just buy it over, right? So again, everybody's consolidating, no matter if you're a crypto and a blockchain or a company with technology, you want to always be the biggest and the best. But in the case of open source, decentralized technology, it becomes a massive win, because you're no longer looking at, oh, that's a threat, that's a competitor, but how can we make this monster white hat company even bigger? So on the screen, you see over here on the left-hand side, I've referenced some of our older lessons, Hyperledger Cello, Hyperledger Cactus, and Ursa. Over here, I learned about something I think is pronounced Tivoli. So this Tivoli company, which was created actually by people who were in IBM, they went separate. So they opened up their own company with their own software, and they started selling this all over the world. And they became known as the leaders of monitoring and management systems. And then became so successful that IBM said, okay, it's time to buy you over and kind of bring you back into the family now. So I pulled up some statistics on it, and it said since 2012, IBM has owned the largest share of IT operations management software, which accounts for roughly 18% of market share. And they are also the leading provider of enterprise asset management software. And why is that important? It's because we're looking again, guys, at bringing all the world's companies into the Stellar ecosystem. So if you're the leading provider of enterprise asset management and software, these are the big companies of the world, which we all know is usually the big cabal companies of the world, are wanted to buy your system because they want the best and you're everywhere. So if we talk about ICSF for Crypto Express, in it, they mentioned that they are building things that are for tamper sensing and how they can respond to hardware security modules. So basically, redundancy of security systems, they can find out, who's trying to tamper with our system. We're going to monitor you, whether it is, let's say, tampering with the code or tampering with the login, whatever it is, right? These are security modules that they're implementing. And a couple interesting things to know within this ICSF is two. One is they're making more advanced symmetric and asymmetric crypto operations. So what does that mean? Symmetric means you have two keys. Asymmetric means you have one key. And a good example of that would be your login, right? So in a symmetric login, you would have to have, as an example, your public key and your private key to match, or maybe your seed phrase, right? So you have two or three different things. In an asymmetric one, it would mean your login would be the private key or the secret keys, right? So it's just one item that you need to have. And so we'll talk about the evolution of this in later slides as well. And the other one is it also provides the ability to secure the encryption keys, which we'll definitely get into much more detail. So again, a couple highlights. As I was going through the various updates of z/OS, I noticed that we were getting hit over and over again. This is for security. This is for governance, right? Security, governance, just over and over in repetition. And again, that's very important because the white hats are creating so much redundancy. So if one system fails, you have another system that comes up. One software fails, you have another software comes up. One code fails, you have another code that comes up. So practically everything that you're looking at is just so many iterations of quantum security and quantum compliance. Now, PDSE, I want to talk about for a quick second because this topic came up yesterday as we were discussing some Q&A in chat. So PDST is really all about generational biometric and multi-signature. And this can easily be used for something like SEP16, which is the account transfer permission, right? Permissionless rather. Account transfer permissionless payment protocol. But it can also be used for SEP19, which is bootstrapping multisig, or KYC and biometrics. And again, all three tied directly to Stellar. So again, this is how you say Stellar without saying Stellar. So why is this important? Because as you're adding your biometrics into the files, right, your retinal scan, your fingerprint scan, your contact information, basically your proof of liveness, you're not just adding it to one wallet, you're adding it to every wallet that you have. And so when you start to put all those pieces together, this database will hold it in these, what they call a data group. Now, because these are yours and it's tied to your biometrics, right? It's your KYC across multiple wallets. It means the authorization is automatic for all of your wallets. But the reason why this topic got brought up in chat yesterday is because we started talking about smart contracts, but especially in terms of, let's say you are already in QSI, you're also one of our QPs, our qualified participants, and many of our ICOs. And let's say you now come out with a goodie bag of 50 different quantum technologies in the future, or 100, or whatever that number is. And maybe you only need a couple of them, and you decide, hey, maybe my kids should get some, because they weren't around to become QP qualified. But let's say 5 years down the road, we want to give them this widget. So how would they qualify in that transfer of title, right? Like in the normal 3D world, you would probably have some kind of contract, like a deed as an example, or a title, and you would have to go to the courts and hire expensive lawyers and draw out a new contract and say, I legally authorize the transfer of this title or this deed over to whoever it is. And they, everybody countersigns it, you execute the contract, and it's done. Well, over here in blockchain, because of something called smart contracts, you're able to do this online. And so whether you want to transfer it to your daughter or your nephew or your wife or whoever it is, it's all online. It's all built into the blockchain. And so the transfer of ownership becomes so much simpler, and you no longer need to write a contract. You no longer need to hire a lawyer. You no longer need to have, everything in between that becomes these third parties, which adds money to the system. So you remove all that redundancy. You have a contract that becomes a smart contract, because the difference between the two is smart contract is programming that allows for permutations of an existing contract. But if you have a quantum smart contract, that means your developers who are writing the code for the smart contracts can already see into the future that you need potentially unlimited versions of permutations. And so they bake into the coding the allowance for it to grow. And when you combine that with intuitive, generative AI/ML, you teach the computers how to become smarter. So they write better smart contracts. So you write it once, and then the computer takes over, from there on. And so because the computer is teaching itself how to get smarter over time, you don't have to keep manually doing updates all the time. And so that's why it's a very powerful tool, but simplified down for transferring a QP status or just linking multiple wallets together. Now you can see how simple it is because of smart contracts, because they're really built to do way more complex kind of programming. Now, one thing about that is for PDSC and how it taps into SEP 1619 and KYC, I just wanted to confirm that with the white hats that we work with. And of course, both Ben and White Hat said, yes, that's the main idea. So we are able to confirm that because of PDSE, this is the big reason why we can transfer things hassle-free in the future. So if you're worried about, having, let's say, you open up 10 Stellar wallets, but you're also doing it because you know that your family is not awake yet. They don't understand the power of Stellar just yet. So maybe your intention is to keep 2 or 3 wallets and maybe give the rest of the way one for every member of the family. Well, when you transfer the account ownership over to your family member, it's going to be going through PDSE. So let's move on and talk about RACF, because this I thought was even more hilarious in how it proves it's stellar. In the RACF, it talks about something called in support of regulations like PCI DSS. And I was like, what the heck does that mean? Well, it stands for Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. Hello, that's literally stellar. So part of the upgrade of the ZOS system is they're upgrading payment card data and security because they're preparing everybody to move on to the Stellar blockchain. So what does PCI DSS do? Well, they are the ones who are in control of processing and securing things like cardholder data protection, authentication in terms of payment, authentication, encryption, data transmission. And so they can use things like encryption, masking, hashing, and truncation, which we'll also cover in later slides as well. But so I wanted to show this because this is, again, more proof that IBM and Deloitte and Stellar have all been working behind the scenes to make sure that when the time came, that they would be able to upgrade the whole world because of Protocol 20 into the Stellar network. And of course, we all know with technology, it takes a while for the actual rollout to happen because it's done, phase by phase. You have to do test by test and make sure everything works before you bring on the next section. But this is why we have so much tremendous proof. So let me give you a couple examples. We have talked about in the past something called Benji, which is the token or the program that Franklin Templeton is using for Stellar. And Nick and I have done some calls, we've done multiple posts on this, but what I found really interesting is in the past, it was all conjecture that this Benji token was tied to Franklin Templeton. Nick will probably remember that on the call, he mentioned things like, actually, I'll let Nick talk about that in a second when we finish this section. But basically, when we were looking at the Benji token, it hadn't been linked anywhere yet. And so we could only throw out theories on what we thought it could be doing. But when I was preparing for this call, and I went onto the Stellar website, anchors.stellar.org, and I looked up all the different anchors, and Franklin Templeton came up. Well, what did I do? I clicked on it, and the link itself here brings us directly to this page here. So now we have both Stellar and Franklin Templeton proving using their own public acknowledgement that this Benji token is part of that. And so that's also why it's so interesting, because as Nick was talking about his theory on Benji and why it's possible and how it's operating, if you look at this actual history of it, there's no payment history. So guys, again, I want to reiterate, Benji token is not a token that we buy into. It's not something that is ICO'd. It is something that is distributed precisely because of what Nick was talking about. That's why we have the actual Franklin Templeton ICO that Stellar Russia launched last year. And so if you look at, the payments, it's zero, everything is zero. So how does it work? Well, it only works because they are sending tokens through whitelisted accounts. And that's why they don't have to buy anything. And no one can buy anything, because if you're not a whitelisted approved wallet, you won't get access to the Benji token. So a couple more examples of how we tie this all in. People from last year may also remember that we've had multiple posts on the XML toolkit and on something called MQ. And in those posts, we talk about how that is actually the pathway that takes us to ISO 20022 and SEPA standards in the future. So here again, in the ZOS updates, they talk about XML toolkit, and then over here they mention MQ being protected, right? These advanced message security for MQ. And so we know that everything's tied, everything's talking about the payment system that they're upgrading their quantum security on. So what does MQ do, or what does, ISO 20022 do? Well, it's payments, checks, collections, financial institutions, treasury, securities, commodities, cash management, credits, guarantees. Guys, this is what we have been proving through all the public articles that have been posted for the last, year plus, and all the D classes that Nick and I have been doing. We've been proving that Stellar is the blockchain for all these payment systems. And here again, IBM is confirming that yes, that's exactly how it's working. So if we look at some of the deadlines coming up, right, we had Red Hat, IBM, PortX, they're all working in partnership with companies like Oracle, Microsoft, and they're the ones, this group right here of these 5 organizations, they're the ones responsible for migrating Swift, FedNow, ACH, X12 onto ISO 20022. And here are some of the deadlines. SEPA migration begins next Sunday, right? Remember they had delayed it for a week? Well, it finally begins next Sunday, March 17. And we know DTCC and Swift already completed their migration last year in November, but it doesn't mean that just because you migrated, it's done. Now, because of what the information from the Swift website said themselves, we know that all throughout 2024, they're going to be doing lots of testing and further enhancements to this migration, not the migration, further enhancements to the standardization process, rather. So the first update was last month. The next update will be in July, and then they're going to release the new standard at the end of this year, November 16. And then, of course, as we all know, they need multiple months to test the next release before they can actually execute the full version of it. So the full live expected version of ISO 20022 is currently March 10 of 2025, which is why we're currently estimating that the earliest the RV can happen is in March of next year, because you have to have the completion of this. Now, if they need more time to do testing, they'll let us know at that point. But this is the reason why anybody who believes that the RV is now or this weekend or this month cannot be correct, because the platform that is bringing the RV to humanity has not been completed yet, because look, they're still needing another year of testing. So again, let's take a quick pause here. And if our panelists want to add anything.
Yeah, on the Benji token that you were talking about, what it was is initially they started, rather than tokenizing the fund itself, what it represented was a share of ownership, not the fund share itself. So it was just a record of who the owners are, and you would get for each share that you bought of this particular, I think it was a government fund, you would get one Benji token. So if you bought 1,000 shares, they would record it on the blockchain, which is immutable, it's there forever, your ownership. And it also allows transfer of ownership too, right on the blockchain. You don't have to go through all the mechanisms that you usually do, sending in forms, data transferring over securities, waiting for it to settle and all that. That's the tremendous benefit of you're going to have instantaneous settlement on any security transactions that you have in the future, which is really, if you've been in the industry, you'll know how difficult it is to get things done and to get confirmation and ownership and all this stuff. It's going to be phenomenal. And then after they did the recording, they probably wanted to test it and make sure it worked. Then they started actually tokenizing and offering out their first fund. So you actually could buy the fund itself in addition to getting the ownership token as well. So that was what was really happening there.
Thanks, Nick. And guys, one of the reasons why we're hammering this Franklin Templeton Benji token is because so many people have asked, but where's the proof that it's really Stellar? Because as we all know, Stellar has basically been bifurcated into two sections, right? You have core and you have anchor. Core is the public version that we can all see. Anchor is the version under NDA that we cannot see. But if you're a company that's been contracted to Stellar and you're under NDA, as Kirill mentioned earlier in our prior D classes, they have special authorization to access a special software program that gives them access to the Anchor platform. And what did we launch last year as a token is the Ledger Bridge. So at some point throughout this year and into next year, they're learning how to bridge these two, right? The public and the NDA versions of Stellar into one, because next year they're going to have to become public for everybody in the world. So the importance of this Benji token is, in my estimation, it's the first one to come out saying publicly, we're no longer under NDA. We're going to publicly acknowledge that if you click on this link, it takes you straight over to this token that everybody in the world can see on the ledger. That way it's no longer a conspiracy or a theory or a guess. And over time, as other contracts, as other NDAs start to expire and lift, you'll see more and more of that happening. But I probably don't foresee any of that until maybe end of this year at the earliest, probably more next year, based on all the information that we've been getting. But this proves, without a shadow of a doubt, that this is interlinked with not just a company, but it's Franklin Templeton. So, people who are in finance or who've been following government funds, they know how massive this is. It's kind of like saying that the PIF for Saudi Arabia, right? So that's why it's monumental.
Yeah, not only that, but if they did it on the Stellar blockchain, they're not only doing one, they have humongous amount of products. It's a very huge company. They're not just going to make this one token and say, okay, that's it, we're done. They're saying basically they're going to be tokenizing probably all of their product offerings on the on the blockchain. This is like kind of a test run to make sure that everything goes properly. But it means that you're going to get, when you see one company go on and tokenize an asset or real world asset, they're not just doing one. They're basically going to be doing a lot more. So that's a very big company to get on board to Stellar. And there's obviously other ones as well.
Exactly. Any final comments?
Hey, I was just going to say, it's definitely a little bit hard with all the technical terms and everything to see all the connections you're always making for sure. But something that stands out to me, kind of the 40,000 foot view, like we're seeing all these massive companies that are like sort of teaming up and working on one particular goal. And like, it's very telling to me, like something has to be going on in the background. Obviously, we kind of know it's Stellar and the white hats and all that, but you see these massive companies who are usually in competition. And I'm sure there's some collaboration typically with these big companies, but they're all coming together to work on sort of like one project. And I just think it's really telling. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Absolutely. We'll come back to that later on as well. Thank you for bringing that up. Hawkeyes?
Yeah, I just want to stress why the testing takes such a long time is because it has to go through its normal business processing. It has to go to different stages so that the next thing is coming in, it will trigger it. So that's why we cannot have the now, no matter how much we want it to happen, but it has to happen its normal life cycle. And even Nick says it's in the industry, it does take a long time to make a change because it has to go ripple down through the life cycle of the processing. And with all of these different changes, like the Swift and the DTC and the SEPA, they have its own life, and then it has to interface or handshake with other systems. So eventually it will triggers down. And also because we have the core and we have the anchor. So the challenge is, what do we show publicly, but what do we also show behind the scene to do the integrations? Because sometimes the core may work, but the anchor doesn't, or vice versa. So they have to go back, roll back, and redo the testing. So we have to be patient, and that's all I wanted to do is just stress that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hawkeyes. And guys, a simple real life version of it is QSI, right? Sometimes we have big D classes like this call, and we know that not 40 something thousand people are going to learn it instantly overnight, or even the 1 or 2,000 who are active in our chat instantly overnight. So what will eventually happen, because we already seen this happen before, is there are going to be some strong nodes who come out and they go, this makes so much sense, and they're going to help teach it, reiterate the lessons from the chat side. And then concurrently or in parallel, we're going to have our leadership team. And under the guidance of our alt instructors and the co-instructors, they're going to say, hey, alt team, which is our quorum leaders, right? We're all building and developing to become leaders. They're going to go, why don't we do some presentations? Because if you guys know it, you can teach your quorums. You can help teach the chat. So when it comes to this beta testing, they're saying, hey, who are some of the strongest banks or fintech companies that we know are out there who have this kind of potential capability? Let's go to them first. You represent this region, and you're going to handle these 5 banks or these 20 companies, and you're going to beta test this tokenization of a security or of a carbon credit or of a physical asset. And we're going to run this also in this region of the world over here. Maybe you do something slightly different. So they're going to run their pilot tests for many, many months. As we've seen in the news, some of these pilot tests take 1 whole year. Okay. After they do their beta tests, they're going to go, this is what worked, this is what didn't work, but they're going to do these iterations all throughout the pilot test. So when the pilot test is done, that's when they say, okay, now it's ready to implement to the masses. And the next time we roll it out, we're going to incorporate another batch of these 20 companies or banks, or maybe these 20 countries. Now it's a bigger beta test, and they're going to do the same iteration over and over again. And that's what Hawkeyes is referring to, why it takes so long, because you're testing what works, what doesn't work. You find the best practices, then you use the companies or the people with the best practices to teach the next phase or the next tier. And then eventually the whole world will learn when you have enough teachers to teach them.
Yeah, and one more, one big component of the testing that takes so long is the stages of scalability, because this is going to be a worldwide system. You're going to have to go to literally billions of people, and you have to test it in stages and add on scalability a little at a time and see if it crashes the system. Then you add on a little more, see if it crashes the system. You got to get it right because you're going to be dealing with the whole world now as opposed to a small particular community. So the scalability factor is going to take, they're going to have to over stress test it because, again, there's so many people or individuals involved that they're going to have to make sure that this thing doesn't crash if all of a sudden you get a flood of people coming into the system.
Yeah, I can give you a real world example. The organization that I work for, I support approximately 125,000 users across the entire world, all the US territories, just everywhere. I manage approximately 6,000 to 8,000 servers across the world. These are all Microsoft servers. One of my job responsibilities is to image these servers when we do a hardware replacement, and we do a hardware replacement every five years. We use Microsoft Windows Server, and what ends up happening is myself and a couple team members, we create an image that is mostly automated. There is some hands-on, but it's mostly automated. And during the testing, so I'll create the image, I'll put all this automation in, and then I will probably image 100 servers, go through this iteration after iteration after iteration, finding bugs, finding things that I screwed up, because that happens all the time. And then finally I'll go, okay, I think it's good to go. And then I give it to another guy who is the best guy to test anything because he breaks everything. And I mean, it's just, this guy re-images his laptop, his work laptop, about every quarter because he just breaks it somehow. Nobody understands how. But anyway, so then I give it to him, and then he says, well, Charlie, this is broken. This didn't work. I didn't understand this, et cetera, et cetera. So then I have to go back to the drawing board, fix those things, give it back to him. And then when he finally gives the okay, then I can give it to about 10 different people and say, go image these servers and tell me what happens and how was your experience. I take that feedback. Now, mind you, we're already in 3 to 4 months with what I just said. That took 3 to 4 months. So then when I get their feedback, I then will make changes, give it back to them. There goes another month. Then I take the feedback until we get that ironed out. And then after that, we will pilot sites, because what happened, basically I have offices all over the world and they have servers in them. And we will pilot sites for a period of time, usually about 1 to 3 months. And we'll have them image their servers, and it's a group of people, specific people that do this imaging process too. They pull out the old hardware, put in the new hardware, and then they image it, and it takes like 2 days to do. So then we'll pilot 10 to 20 sites or 10 to 30 sites, and then after that, if everything is okay with that, we may either do another pilot if we really screwed up and there was issues on the first pilot. Then we go to a second pilot, or we go to production. And when we go to production, we do a ramp up. So like for the first month, we only do a couple sites a week. We have a team of like 10 guys and gals that do this, and they will do just a couple sites a night or per week. So we do like 10 sites a week for the first month. If all goes well, there's no issues, then we start ramping up slowly, where we get to the point of we are doing I think it's up to 30 to 40 sites a week, because we don't want to overload and overload that team that's doing the actual work. Plus we have to schedule with Dell, who's the hardware provider, because they're the ones who they hired their contractors to go out and they swap out the physical hardware. Having said that, all this and the full migration from the pilot to the end takes 12 months across the entire world, over, it's 5 to 8,000 servers. And literally we have an office in Russia, Ukraine, everywhere. Once I retire, I'll let you guys know where I work and you'll giggle. But that's just to give you, that is a real world example of how long things take. Drives me nuts. I'm like, this should be done in 3 months, but it is what it is and nothing I can do to change it.
Awesome. Thank you, Sinjin. Yaska, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to comment on that waiting thing and how things get done, like how much they take time is one thing for ordinary people. Of course, it's really hard to understand that how much work is happening all the time in the background. And what I think is the most telling for ordinary people to see how their banks operate, how much they are validating your identity and your relationships with different kind of businesses and the leaders of the world, and they are restricting your accounts, and they are kind of like validating and validating again and again and again. And then there is all the time banks are stopping the transactions, or there's a operational break in the banks. It's happening all the time in every bank, especially in Finland. I'm sure it's happening worldwide. But if people are not understanding that this is all preparing us to the RV and the ISO 20 and forward. So I think that um, I really like the high-tech discussion that we're having, because for ordinary people, they don't really understand how long it takes to build this kind of a structure. In my head, it's quite clear, and for me, it's just a fun ride. But on the other hand, if you don't understand the technical specifics, then you're kind of like tapping your foot on the ground and saying like, well, hey, what the hell is taking so long? But I really love this, so I'm really happy to listen to everybody's input here.
Yeah, not only upgrading, but using all new technology. So you got the combination of new technology and, testing it out as well. So I mean, they're going actually remarkably fast, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I like
Yeah,
mentioned how there are so many, so many banks going down, right? It's like we've all been around for a couple of years, right? Nobody here is under 2 or 3 years old. And I can't remember in my lifetime in any country that I've lived in where in the last couple of years, or sorry, before the last couple of years, websites and apps were crashing all the time, or they would be down for days or weeks, not just hours. That's never happened before that I can remember of, but it all happened in the middle of these banks coming online to become quantum compliant. And then as they were going through their XRP bridges, the XLM bridges, and then until now. So it tells you that the timing is not a coincidence.
just one more thing I want to add, which we don't really discuss a lot. We discuss the critters and the scammers in the blockchain, but I think that's something that is very important to understand also, that they are also uh, following the criminals at the moment. And that's why they are so like nitty gritty with all the details and with all the information. And I love um, how people are getting so annoyed that, oh my God, I'm an honest person and I don't have anything to do with it. Why are they asking me all these questions? Because they don't understand that this is for the criminals, and they're actually really, really closing down the net so that they don't really have anywhere to go to. And I really like how everything is unfolding, and it's getting tighter and tighter, and the money flows and everything. So I'm actually enjoying this phase a lot, because you can really see like how narrow the tunnel is getting before it opens up.
Yeah, I mean, Emily dropped that bomb early in, and I bet you a bunch of people glossed over it. Basically talked about the blockchain of blockchains, where not only do the good guys have a massive blockchain with Atom, but they're also connecting it to all of the banks and everything, so that this is all for the AI and the generative AML to track all the nefarious stuff. I mean, it's just that was a bombshell that everybody just glossed over. I'm like, she just said that Adam and Delight and the good guys have they're literally tracking everything. It's kind of like Space Force, they say that Space Force has it all. I mean, it's to be able to have that granularity. I was actually having a discussion with my wife the other night. She was trying to play 20 questions of, with the QFS, and there's always going to be an evil person trying to scam it. I'm like, yeah, but even they're going to get at least 99% of it. And now Emily drops this little bombshell that's saying that they have it all connected, and the AML and the AI is touching every blockchain, every bank, every transaction, every time a penny moves from A to B, they are tracking it. Well, good effing luck, bad guys, because you are. I mean, if they, that's insane. I mean, that is a total game changer.
So I want to add to that really quickly. This is more behind the scenes talk, and then if we have other comments, otherwise we'll move on to the last section. But when you think about, who is monitoring what, you mentioned that they're KYCing the banks, right? And it is for both. If you are a good person, meaning you're not a criminal, they still need to KYC AML you because they're putting you into the records, like how we talked about with PDSE. They're putting your contact information into this generational profile, which ties into that payment, the security and authorization, right? So it's all getting put into the system. But then as they know that you're okay and they're monitoring your transaction and all is well and fine, and all the people that you touch are all in fine, that trains the algorithm, again, because it's intuitional, generative AI/ML, that trains the algorithm to say, hey, 98% of the world, this is a normal transaction. These are normal people. When we talk about the critters, the criminals, they go, this looks a little shady because they're not doing what 98% of the world does. They're doing something different. And because of that difference, again, they're training the intuitive, generative AI/ML. And so the program is learning these are what to look for if you're a cockroach. And then the cockroach will say, oh, I want to change my tactics. It's fine, you can, because they've already flagged your account. You're already a criminal account in the system. So as you change your tactics, they just watch and go, haha, that's your new tactic. Let's add that into the intuitive generative AI/ML, right? So it teaches itself how to get smarter and stronger. And then let's say I want to off ramp my funds. I take it out of the bank and I'm just going to use a credit card or a debit card. Again, guys, that's why they've been KYC'd, so they can track all of your payments. Okay, well, what if I want to use cash transactions? That's cool. If they have your receipts, Nick already confirmed that the IRS was tracking all your receipts, so they have access to that information too. Okay, well, but what if I go black market? That's cool too. You want to do it? Go black market. Why? Because the NSA, Space Force, Stellar Russia, all those guys, they're tracking you on your phone, in your laptop, and they can hear what little cockroach stuff is scurrying around in your brain, and they go, these guys who we knew were cockroaches and scammers and criminals, they're trying to exit the system and go the black market system, not remembering that we're still monitoring them through other means. So yeah, we're squeezing them. We're funneling them into a trap, and they're going to close the trap when all this testing is done.
It won't
So
be
check
in
this.
my pockets.
So check this out. At dinner the other night, this is when she was playing 20 questions with me with the QFS. I said, okay. She talked about what if they go black market, like you just said. I said, okay, well, what are they going to do? And I held up a fork. And I said, okay, so fork is the new currency for the bad guys. So how are they? So they're just going to trade forks around. I've got 10 forks, so I want this, bad thing. That's not going to work because at some point you have to off ramp it. So the minute that you try to off ramp those forks for money, that's when they get you. And I was trying to explain to her that it's just not possible for them to create their own, because she was talking about them creating their own type of currency. And I'm like, that doesn't work because at some point, if you want to buy that Lamborghini, you've got to put it in the currency that's of the world. And you can't pay with it with 10,000 forks if that's their new currency. We were eating dinner, okay? Give me a break. So I was like, it just doesn't work. You have to off ramp it, and that's so you may be able to move forks around and all that other kind of stuff, but as soon as you go to try to buy the Lamborghini or the house or whatever it is, you're screwed. It's over.
Not only that, if they try to use cash, the cash is going to have a serial number that's tied into a digitized version of the money. So even if you move the cash, it's the same thing as if you're moving the tokens. It doesn't make a difference. They can track it, whether it's physical cash or whether it's digitized cash. So there's no real way around it. And the KYC is they're cross-checking it through industries, and you'll have one KYC, you use it for everything. They'll be able to know you, and you don't have to each time you go to something, you have to KYC. It's going to be one that's going to be universal for all industries and in all areas. But my favorite stuff is the traps that they set with all these, Coinbase crash, we see $50 billion vanished, or all of a sudden there's a proliferation of spot ETFs on all the criminal currencies and stuff. It just cracks me up. You got to kind of like read code language and say, okay, I know what that thing is. But they're doing it. They're doing it pretty good and fast.
All right. Any final
And one last thing. I know we're talking a lot about a lot of the negative side, but the positive side of the whole generative, AMIL is that it's to protect us too. I mean, so if something does happen out of the 98%, which is the norm, maybe we get a text message or a phone call that says, "Hey, did you really want to do this?" And it's there to protect us, not just to grab all the critters and everything.
Yeah, 100%. And let me piggyback off of that as well, because we have also been talking about this for over a year, and we've done many calls with Nick as well on automated trading that we know is being tested in the background. Well, how can they automate trading? Well, it's because they're using all these proprietary formulas that, hedge funds and investment banks, et cetera, have been using for a long time, and they're learning how to interoperate the trading algorithm so you have a bigger algorithm. And then later on, I'm going to spill the beans a little bit, or maybe not spill the beans, but I'm going to spill it and manifest it into existence at the same time. I've already asked and gotten approval that Nick will be helping to clean out the algorithms. So one thing that Nick has mentioned in the past is these big firms have built into their algorithms little almost like gotchas, where even though it's a successful trading algorithm, they're still siphoning something on the side. So Nick is going to help us eliminate all those side things so it maximizes the ROI for people and it minimizes the shadiness too.
You better get St. John on that team too, because he knows a lot, even much more than I do probably. He builds the algorithms as well.
Perfect. Then we'll make that happen. Okay, so let's move on to the last section,